Okay guys, a massive earthquake. I mean massive. We are looking at a magnitude 7. 7 out of Indonesia, and this number has been climbing since the moment it hit. It started out at 7, 4, then it got bumped to 7, 5, and now, after the reviewed solutions came in, we are sitting at 7. 7. And the aftershocks are just hitting one after another. Boom, boom, boom. The strongest one so far is a 6. 1. But honestly, look at the list underneath it. There are so many. And on top of that, the tsunami situation has escalated. We are now looking at what officials are calling a dire warning. If you look at where this thing actually happened, yes, it is offshore, but it is offshore of a densely populated stretch of coastline, and it is not far offshore either. That is exactly the problem. If you caught the first reports calling this a 6.9, throw that number out. It is already outdated, the picture has moved fast. So this is another big one, and it comes not long after what we saw out of Colombia, which I was just talking about a few days ago. People are already asking me, is there some kind of ping-pong effect happening here? Are these earthquakes somehow bouncing off each other across the globe? I actually put out a full video addressing that question, so if you are curious, go check that out. Because I want to focus this update purely on what is unfolding in Indonesia right now. Let's get into the numbers, because they matter here more than almost any earthquake I have covered this year. The reviewed USGS moment tensor, the beach ball solution, places this earthquake at magnitude 7, 73, with a source depth, meaning the epicenter depth, of roughly 13.5 kilometers. That works out to a little over 8 miles down. That is shallow. And we know the rule with these things, big and shallow, is not a good combination because the shaking right around the epicenter is especially violent when there is infrastructure sitting on top of it. And this stretch of Indonesia is very heavily populated. So we are talking about a genuinely powerful earthquake that struck beneath the Flores Sea, roughly 68 kilometers or 42 miles north-northwest of the city of Ende on Flores Island in Indonesia's east, Nusa Tenggara province. Following that, Indonesia's Meteorological, Climatological, and Geophysics Agency, BMKG, raised part of that tsunami warning to their highest alert category, what they call siaga. I want to explain exactly what that means, because a lot of people see the word warning and don't grasp the scale. Siaga level means modeled tsunami heights in the range of half, a meter up to 3 meters. Translate that into feet, and you're looking at roughly 1.5 feet on the low end, up to almost 10 feet at the high end. And here's the thing people need to understand. You do not need 10 feet of water to kill people. 3 feet of moving water is enough to be an absolutely deadly situation. It can sweep you off your feet, pull you under, drag you out, or wash you straight out to sea. So when I say this is dangerous, I mean it in the most literal sense. The affected coastlines, you can see them right there on the map, wrapped around where that epicenter sits, and the instructions to residents in those zones have been to evacuate immediately and get to higher ground. Right now, I do not have any models suggesting tsunami heights above that 10-foot ceiling, and I am hoping it stays that way, but we are still in the early hours here. There is no reliable confirmed accounting yet of how many people have been lost or injured, and there is no comprehensive damage assessment either, simply because this event has only just happened and information from the ground takes time to surface. What we do have is USGS's shaking alert, and that has been placed at orange. That tells us damages expected, and in fact, there's already an automated casualty model running in the background, which right now puts the estimate somewhere between 10 and 100 people lost. I want to stress, guys, this is not a confirmed number. This is a computer-generated probability built from the strength of the shaking, how many people were exposed to it, and the vulnerability of the buildings in the affected area. And when you look at where the most severe shaking intensity is concentrated, it is not out in some empty stretch of ocean. It is right up against a densely populated coastline. So the potential for a serious human impact was baked into the modeling from the very first minutes. Now let's talk about what kind of earthquake this actually was, because it explains why the tsunami warning went out so fast. The moment tensor solution is very clear on this one. That blue beach ball diagram is dominated by reverse or thrust faulting. In the simplest terms I can give you, the crust on either side of this fault was being squeezed together, and one block of crust rode up and over the other. And here is the key thing to remember with these events. Whenever a fault ruptures with vertical motion, that is your tsunami factor. Compare that to something like the San Andreas, which is a strike-slip fault, sideways motion, and generally you don't have to worry nearly as much about a tsunami. But the moment you get vertical movement, especially underneath the ocean like we have here, you get what people call the bathtub effect. The seafloor itself gets displaced, and all the water sitting above it has to move with it. That's just basic physics. So a thrust earthquake like this one can physically lift or lower a section of seafloor, and if it moves that ocean floor fast enough and far enough vertically, the entire column of water above it gets shoved out of the way. That is the basic mechanism generating this tsunami threat. And the moment tensor here is overwhelmingly tectonic in nature. The USGS solution is showing 95% double couple motion, which in plain terms means this is a textbook fault rupture. This is not a volcanic explosion, it's not a collapse event, it's not some mysterious pressure release under the Flores Sea. This is a major tectonic rupture, and both lobes of that beach ball point strongly toward a compressional, reverse-style movement. Now, I want to be careful here, because right now we cannot simply glance at a beach ball diagram and declare with total confidence exactly which fault plane actually slipped. Beach balls give you two possible nodal planes, and it usually takes the aftershock distribution and eventually a proper finite fault model to tell us definitively which one actually ruptured. That takes us to the geography of this thing, because this earthquake did not occur along the main Java Trench south of Flores, which is the subduction zone most people would assume is responsible for something like this. It actually occurred north of Flores, in a different but extremely important compressional system. The leading candidate right now is what's known as the Flores back arc thrust system, or a closely related structure within that back arc deformation zone. If you look at the wider map, you can see Australia sitting south of all of this. The Australian plate is being driven underneath the Indonesian island arc, and that enormous convergence is not fully absorbed at the trench alone. A significant amount of that compression gets transferred back into the crust behind the volcanic arc itself. So north of Flores and the neighboring islands, that ongoing compression has built what's called the Flores back arc thrust. And this is a major zone, genuinely big, where crust is essentially being shoved over crust. This system has produced major shallow thrust earthquakes before, and combined with the location and reverse mechanism of tonight's event, it makes this system extremely relevant right now. Until we actually get the rupture plane mapped out properly, I don't want to tell you we can name the exact fault segment with total certainty. But we absolutely know what kind of system we are dealing with here. And there is a piece of history tied to this exact stretch of coastline that we cannot ignore because it is directly relevant to how seriously people should be taking this. And back in December of 1992, Flores was hit by another enormous earthquake, a magnitude 7. 8. That earthquake generated a devastating tsunami, and together the shaking and the wave killed more than 2,500 people. Look at the coordinates for a second. The 1992 earthquake struck around 8.48 degrees south, 121.84 degrees east. Today's earthquake is sitting around 8.31 degrees south, 121.35 degrees east. Do the math on that, and those two epicenters are roughly 57 kilometers apart, about 36 miles. Now, I am not telling you tonight's earthquake is a repeat of 1992. I am not saying the exact same patch of fault has ruptured again, but that kind of proximity tells you something important about what this region is capable of. It does not guarantee the tsunami will behave the same way this time, and I genuinely hope it doesn't. But the history here is extremely relevant tectonically. This part of Flores has already demonstrated in living memory that a shallow earthquake in the upper sevens can produce a genuinely destructive tsunami. That is exactly why people are so worried tonight. There's another layer to the tsunami concern that I want to walk you through, because a lot of people misread these warning numbers. When you see a figure like 3 meters or 10 feet, that is not a promise of a uniform 10-foot wave slamming into every single point along that coastline. You have to think about how the coastline itself is shaped. Is it flat and low-lying? Is it cliff coastline? These details change everything about how a tsunami actually behaves when it makes landfall. And right now, this 3-meter figure is still a modeled threat category, not a confirmed observation. Evacuations are underway, people are moving to higher ground as a precaution, but actual wave heights can vary dramatically from one stretch of coast to the next, depending on the shape of the coastline, the depth of the water just offshore, whether there are bays or harbors that can funnel and concentrate the water, and even the direction the rupture propagated in, which can focus energy towards some communities while sparing others almost entirely. And here's something people often get wrong. The tsunami height recorded right at the coast is not necessarily the same as the maximum run-up you'll see further inland. In a lot of historical tsunamis, it's actually the second, third, or fourth wave that turns out to be the most damaging, not the first one. So what I am really waiting for right now is not another model output. I want an actual observation from the tide gauges sitting along that coast. That is the number that matters most in the next hour or two. As of this moment, we still do not have an authoritative confirmed tsunami height coming out of the affected areas. Let's shift back underground for a second, because the earthquake sequence here became energetic almost immediately. The magnitude, 7. 7 struck first, and only about 15 minutes later another quake appeared, roughly magnitude 5. 9, later revised towards 6. 1, located northeast, up near Labuan Bajo. Then, just several minutes after that, another quake, magnitude 5. 6, showed up northwest of Enda. That is a genuinely powerful early aftershock sequence. Now, to be clear, after a magnitude 7 main shock, a strong aftershock sequence is expected. This is not some shocking anomaly. In fact, an aftershock reaching well into the magnitude 6 range wouldn't be extraordinary at all following an earthquake this large. What actually matters is where these aftershocks are lining up geographically, because that pattern can answer a lot of open questions. And after that first magnitude 6 aftershock, another one followed, also around 6. They just kept coming. Aftershocks essentially trace the rupture out for us, almost like dots being plotted on a page. If you map out where those epicenters are landing, that tells you where the fault actually broke. This is genuinely one of the more interesting parts of tracking an event like this in real time. If those aftershocks organize themselves along the shallower, dipping one of the 2 nodal planes from that beach ball, that tells us one interpretation of where the fault sits. If instead they organize along the steeper plane, that would point to something different. And if the seismicity starts spreading out beyond the original rupture zone, that's when attention has to shift to whether neighboring fault systems are being stressed as well. There's also an earlier earthquake worth mentioning. Back on August 2nd, 12 days before tonight's main shock, a magnitude 6 struck about 65 kilometers, roughly 40 miles northwest of Enda. Geographically, that is remarkably close to tonight's epicenter, but that 6 was sitting much deeper, around 32 miles down, 51 kilometers, so I would be very careful about calling that a foreshock. A foreshock is really only defined after the fact, once a larger earthquake occurs nearby, and we look back and reclassify the smaller event. Geographic closeness alone doesn't prove the 2 events ruptured the same fault surface, and the depth difference here is significant and genuinely worth investigating further. But right now, that 6 from 12 days ago is not evidence that anyone could have predicted tonight's 7. Now let's talk about the human side of this, because that's ultimately what matters most. The earthquake struck at roughly 6 in the morning local time. Seismic instruments can tell us almost instantly how large an earthquake was. They can estimate shaking intensity within minutes, and they can model tsunami potential very quickly. What they absolutely cannot do is tell us, in real time, what happened inside every coastal village, every individual home, every road, every isolated community scattered around Flores. That kind of information comes in slowly, and I want everyone watching to be careful with what circulates on social media in these first hours. There are bot networks and fake accounts that flood these situations almost instantly. Sometimes hundreds of accounts posting recycled or entirely fabricated content within minutes of a major quake. You'll see old footage relabeled as if it just happened, and false claims spreading faster than verified information. So real information takes real time. Communications infrastructure can be knocked out. Rescue teams have to physically reach damaged areas. Hospitals have to compile and report figures. And local officials have to verify everything before numbers become genuinely reliable. The absence of a confirmed casualty count in the first hour should never be interpreted as proof that no one was hurt. And now that a bit more time has passed since this thing first hit, we are starting to get real, confirmed information from the ground. And I want to walk you through what has actually been verified. Indonesia's National Disaster Agency has confirmed that 2 people died at the port in Maumere, a man and a woman, along with at least 1 other person injured. That's a confirmed figure now, not the computer-generated pager model range I was quoting earlier. That 10 to 100 number was always a probability estimate, and now we have an actual reported toll starting to come in, and unfortunately, I expect that number will likely climb as more reports come in from harder-to-reach areas over the coming hours and days. We're also getting real damage reports now. In Maumere, the waiting room at the Pelni port terminal reportedly collapsed. At a seminary on Flores, the roof of an assembly hall came down while students were attending morning mass, sending people fleeing in panic, thankfully without, as far as we know right now, mass casualties from that specific incident. There are also reports of damaged homes and public buildings in Ruting, in the Manggarai region, and in Sika, with residents describing panicked crowds running toward higher ground the moment the shaking started. One resident described watching that port terminal building come down with her own eyes. In terms of scale, USGS is now estimating that more than 500,000 people across Flores likely experienced very strong shaking from this event, with moderate to strong shaking felt by several million more people across the wider region. That gives you a sense of just how significant the human exposure footprint is here. This isn't a quake that hit an empty stretch of coastline. It hit directly into one of the more populated parts of eastern Indonesia. On a slightly reassuring note, tsunami monitoring authorities to the south have confirmed that this event poses no threat to the Australian mainland or its territories, so the immediate danger zone remains concentrated around the Indonesian coastlines closest to the rupture. I want to bring this back to the bigger picture for a second, because I think it's important context. Indonesia sits directly on the Pacific Ring of Fire, this massive arc of fault lines and volcanoes that wraps around the Pacific Basin, and it is one of the most seismically active places on the entire planet. Multiple tectonic plates are converging in this exact region. The Australian plate pushing north beneath the Indonesian arc, and that convergence has to be accommodated somewhere, whether that's at the main trench or in these back arc thrust systems we talked about earlier. This isn't the first time this specific stretch of coastline has produced a major deadly earthquake and tsunami, and unfortunately, given the tectonics at play here, it almost certainly won't be the last. That's exactly why the 1992 comparison matters so much to people who study this region closely. It's not fear-mongering, it's pattern recognition based on decades of documented seismic history in that exact corridor. So where does that leave us right now? We have a confirmed magnitude 7 earthquake, shallow reverse faulting mechanism, striking in a densely populated part of eastern Indonesia. We have an active tsunami warning that was escalated to the highest alert category for the region, with modeled wave heights up to around 3 meters. We have a vigorous aftershock sequence that is still ongoing, with multiple quakes in the magnitude 5 and 6 range following the main shock within the first half hour alone. We have confirmed fatalities, at least 2 so far, with injuries reported and damage to buildings including a port terminal and a seminary hall, and we should expect those numbers to be revised as rescue teams reach more remote and coastal communities. And we have a historical precedent sitting less than 60 kilometers away that killed thousands of people just a few decades ago, which is exactly why authorities are not taking any chances with this warning. I'll keep tracking this one closely, and I will absolutely be back with an update the moment we get more verified numbers, more damage assessments, or any actual tide gauge readings from along that coast. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you get the next update the second I post it, because these situations tend to evolve fast in the first 24 to 48 hours. And if you're wondering about that ping pong question I mentioned earlier, or if you want to see what's been happening with the seismic activity out in California recently, go check out those 2 videos. They're both genuinely worth your time if you're into this stuff. I'll see you very soon with another update on this one. Stay safe out there, guys. Bye-bye.